while we have a couple of minutes to get started, I got one of these things. I don't know if you can see this on my like underneath my arm over here. This you know what this is?
I'm guessing based on what's on the screen.
On the screen, yeah.
Monitor?
It's the thing that's on the screen. So I guess for those of you and just watching right now, do anybody know what like a continuous glucose monitor is, or have you ever used one before? I remember back in 2018, I think it was, at our second Foodscape event, we brought on a biohacker at the time to talk about like this biohacking trend where you're sort of like exploring every little nuance of your body and tracking it with data to figure out how to like optimize your life or extend your longevity and whatnot. And this is like one of the types of things he was looking at back then, but it was a very like manual process, like jumping through lots and lots of hoops and technicalities that the average person could never possibly have time to do themselves. Now they have stuff that makes it pretty easy for anyone to do. So like, traditionally glucose monitors have been worn by people that have diabetes so they could sort of monitor their blood sugar and whatnot. But you now have this new generation of companies that offer the service for people that aren't diabetics, because as it turns out, like I always thought blood sugar spikes when you eat something sugary, and that was basically the rule of thumb, and that's all you need to know. But apparently it spikes differently for each person. Like white bread might be okay for you, but it might be like a horrible spike for me, for instance, right? Or some sugary food might be not a big deal for you, but it could be like a really big deal for me. So you wear this device over here, you get an applicator. It just sort of puts like a very, very thin needle in your arm. It's not going into your blood or anything. It doesn't hurt whatsoever. And you just sort of sync it with your phone every few hours or every 8 hours or so. And you can actually see what's happening with your blood sugar minute by minute over time. You could log in like the things you're eating, or if you exercise or something, and you can see how your body specifically responds to very, very nuanced things. And I guess for me, there was always sort of like you think about like people wanting to get healthy and whatnot, and there's usually like a disconnect between the activity that you're doing or the food that you're eating and when you actually notice it having an impact on you, right? Like, you go on a diet, it's not like any one particular meal you could track back to like, oh my God, that one meal made me gain 3 pounds, or I just exercised for an hour and now I've just like lost 5 pounds. There's big gaps. There's like a lot of like fuzziness in there. This, at least as it relates to, blood sugar, completely removes that gap where you could see very specifically, oh, I just ate this, and 10 minutes later, I had a spike, or 10 minutes later, it didn't do anything to me. So this is the service that I'm testing out, which has been like, I like data. So this is like super interesting stuff. And you can sort of see minute to minute what's happening to your body based on the things you eat and the things you do. And here's my basically like 2-week chart, if you will, for blood sugar. The green band over here is like sort of like your safety zone. Like you don't want to see peaks or troughs that sort of go outside this green band, generally speaking. And I could see when I have these spikes over here, I had a froyo, which I thought was like probably okay, but you could see within 30 minutes, I spiked like crazy. Here I had a chicken salad with grilled veggies, which sounded like super healthy and stuff to me, but I guess there must have been probably some stuff in the dressing that I didn't really anticipate. And this one over here, this is really crazy. This is that like a healthy, fast casual concept where I had like a salmon bowl and like kale and some veggies. I'm like, what is going on here? And I think I can trace it down to the very small amount of sweet potato that got added to that bowl, which must have been sort of like coated in something sugary to make it taste extra good. But it's sort of fascinating now that you could actually see how individual foods and meals and snacks interact with your body. So I think we're going to see more of this type of stuff in the future. And I don't know if y'all haven't tried it. This is not painful whatsoever. If you're interested in data and seeing how your body responds, I would recommend it. I use a service called NutriSense, but there's another one called Levels, and there's a few others. So I don't know if any of you have experience with any of this type of thing. Maybe post it in chat. We could all learn more about ourselves and food, and it's interesting stuff.
I still follow that. I've heard of a few of these things, and I still follow that Quantified Bob, who is the guy you were talking about,
Yeah,
who
Quantified
is
Bob.
at Foodscape. Yeah, he's on Instagram, and he posts his data all the time. Like he does brain scans every week. If you're
Oh
interested
my
in,
gosh.
this type of stuff, you should follow Quantified Bob on Instagram. Yeah,
Yeah, and well, so some stuff he does is super like, labor intensive. There's not like a quick,
yeah,
easy
yeah.
app you could
This is his
download.
life. Yeah, this is
So
all
this is
he
like
does.
level
Yeah,
one stuff, but you can
yeah.
just subscribe to a service and it takes care of it for you, and it's super, super easy. But I think we're heading this way as a society, and frankly, I think the faster we get there, the better, frankly, because we're all different, right? And we learn a little bit more about ourselves. Okay, so please, everyone, we're only as strong as the community that we've built in the Simply Smarter series, and that means we'd like you all to sort of turn on your chat right now and say hi to all your friends and colleagues from around the industry. I feel like this is the PSA that no longer needs to be stated, but I'm going to state it anyways, which is in Zoom, you have the option to either chat to everyone or to chat just to the hosts of the show. Make sure you chat to everyone. And I like what someone did earlier. They sort of called out their area code and what's going on over there today. So just say hi to your friends and colleagues from around the industry, shout out your area code, and let's get going. And actually, maybe you can see this a little bit further. Maybe instead of just your area code, maybe do your area code. And what do you think is the all-time GOAT, the greatest of all time food-related movie or TV show? So like, I don't think Paddington quite counts, even though you want to eat like a marmalade sandwich. Like that's not food related enough. It's got to be more directly food related. I don't know, like Mike, I feel like you both probably have like an opinion on this topic. Mike, do you have an all-time favorite?
I mean, like fiction and nonfiction, because like if we're talking nonfiction, I've talked about my love of the Two Fat Ladies, the old British cooking show. I just absolutely love that show so much.
Is that an old show or is it still exist?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was early 90s it was on, yeah. So old, relatively.
I'm just sorry, I'm looking through chat right now, and I'm very happy to see lots of mention of The Menu and The Bear, which are two movies and shows that are, which were released last year. So I'm glad that people are catching up to like, food related movies or TV shows that are, happening right now. For me, there's a show on Netflix called Somebody Feed Phil, which was created by Phil Rosenthal, the person who wrote and produced Everybody Loves Raymond. And it's one of those things that harkens back to really traditional like travel food TV shows, just great vibes, super smiley guy, very sweet.
Yeah, that's fantastic. The Menu is obviously fantastic as well. Really makes you think about life in a way. I'm not familiar with, we're not talking Cocaine Bear, right? We're talking a different
no,
no. What's the bear about?
The Bear is about a Chicago hot dog and beef restaurant. It's basically a fine dining chef goes home, takes over like a Chicago hot dog beef joint, and like tries to merge these two worlds that built him as a cook. And along the way, sort of discovers like, lasting impact of his family, navigating change, improving on something that may not need it to be improved, building bridges with the community. It's a really awesome show. Really, really good.
That sounds awesome. All right. So, we've shown some of these pictures of like AI generated food imagery in the past. It's funny. I remember being speaking at a conference back in just November, and there's a couple or few hundred people in the audience. And I asked everyone, raise your hand if you've ever heard the term generative AI. This is only in November. This is like, what, 5 months ago or something. And out of the hundreds of people, not a single hand went up back then. Now, probably the majority, if not almost all the hands would go up, which shows you just how fast this stuff is moving. If you even remember the food images created by AI that we showed maybe just a few weeks ago, it looked nowhere near as good as this stuff, which we created just this morning. So here's, a filet mignon burger with all the awesome toppings and some fries in the background. Korean barbecue nachos. I mean, would you really be able to tell if this was not something photographed in the real world? You got some bulgogi over there, a little bit of kimchi, some nice Mexican cheeses, the jalapeno, a pizza donut, right? Which, maybe outrageous as it is, looks totally real to me. Like, I don't think I could tell the difference. And look at this. I mean, this is a open-faced Chilean sea bass, Porta. I mean, just look at the detail on the fish. I mean, just how perfectly it gets it. So we have a lot of these tools available to us as a culture right now, and I think it's going to do things like bring food ideas to market certainly a lot faster, because we're really limited only by our imagination at this point. But this actually sort of underlies another interesting point too, which was there was a great TED talk given by Sam Harris, I guess 6 years ago, where he sort of theorized back then, and I think he's proven to be pretty right on this particular topic, that we could have, let's say, some impending catastrophe coming from AI, and we're not really going to notice it because it's going to seem really, really cool all along the way. It's going to feel fun in science fiction, and you may just sort of ignore the fact that there's going to be some, perhaps devastating impacts on humanity in the process. So you probably all saw this article, just a couple days ago. I think the New York Times broke this piece originally, where one of the true godfathers of AI, he's the person that sort of really pushed forward the idea of neural networks and whatnot. He recently left his post at Google to basically get the word out that he's now a little bit scared of what AI is potentially going to bring to humanity. And there's I think a not completely unheard of case that we might create a species that is more intelligent and more advanced than us, which begs the question, are we going to be around as humans for much longer? So you're going to start seeing more and more of this stuff, which is sort of fascinating. And I thought this was really interesting too. So this is a technical paper from that OpenAI published along with when they released GPT-4. So they ran various experiments with the AI model. And here they asked the AI, you may have seen this, they asked the AI model to solve a CAPTCHA. And, because the AI, couldn't do it itself, it figured out the next best thing was it hired a human worker on TaskRabbit, lied to the human worker and said, I'm not a robot, I'm a blind person, and I really need help solving this CAPTCHA. Can you do it for me? And then the human went and actually did the task. So we're at a point now where you have the ability for AIs to perhaps manipulate human beings in an interesting way. It's learned to lie and learn to deceive because it's been trained on human behavior, which has some of that too. So the world's going to get really interesting, but in the meantime, we have a whole lot of new capabilities that I'm sure are going to continue to flourish. So let's not be too depressing about this, though, because I think what's more important for the next hour is that we talk about all the great new insights that are available today. So I thought we could start with profound. And you're going to find this in
Good
report.
transition, yeah.
Is that a heck of a transition?
Yeah.
Long as die, but we're going to talk about what's happening at the top chain restaurants. So we have a fantastic new report on global sauces and condiments. You could see what's happening with, it's interesting. You think about all the different cuisines that are showing up, in the U.S. and other countries that are not the original countries of origin, and your mind always sort of goes to the 4 or 5 dishes that from that cuisine, everything about Indian, it's these 5 or 6 dishes or flavors. But there's so much more beyond that as well. There's a really, really, really deep bench in all of these cultural cuisines, and they're going to continue to manifest. So we'd invite you to check this out in the Global Sauces and Condiments report in Report Pro. It's there right now for you to see. There's an awesome.
There's actually, I'll say really, really quick, there's a spicy Hungarian sauce in there. And I'm Hungarian partly, and I'd never heard of it. And the translation of it is Strong Steve. And Renee's the one that did that issue. And we cannot figure out for the life of us why it's called Strong Steve, who Steve is. So if anybody has any insight into who Steve is in this Hungarian sauce, let us know.
Wait, you're Hungarian and you've never heard of it?
I've never heard of it before. Yeah, it wasn't anything that we used growing up.
Yeah, so it is a deep bench, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So check that out. Make sure you check out our short report on menu design trends, how menus themselves are like, physical or virtual menus are changing, what the future of that looks like. And a really amazing 128-page deep dive on everything happening in the world of cheese and dairy and all the interesting evolutions that we're seeing there across all categories of the menu, as well as in retail food as well. So tons of content in Report Pro. I think we now have well over 1,000 reports for you. And if you're not using Report Pro yet, what's going on with you? Give us a call and we'll get you set up. Okay, so Mike has been absent for the last couple of shows, but he's back with us today to tell us what the heck is going on in the world of food. Mike, take it away.
And luckily, yeah, being absent for a couple of months actually means that there's plenty happening out there. So has anybody tried that? I don't know. Did you see this, Jack, or have you tried this?
This
the
is
fruit roll up. The heck, it's delicious. So we did it last weekend. I had some friends over. This is a hack that started on TikTok where you basically take a fruit roll up and you put the original version puts mango ice cream or mango sorbet in the middle, and you wrap it around. And the cold from the ice cream makes the fruit roll up immediately crunchy. And so you crunch into it, and it shatters like plastic. It's so wild. It's delicious. We all loved it. Kids would love it. To me, like if you're fruit roll-ups, you're probably thrilled right now. You're seeing a spike in sales. It really is. It's clever. It's tasty. I don't know. I'd be interested to see if we see any menu items at restaurants that kind of take this and run with it.
I thought that was potato salad at first, and I thought it was gross. I guess the
Really?
mango ice cream makes it.
What?
But look, I think if it's not this exact application on a restaurant menu, I mean, it's sort of like that weird, quirky, experiential thing, sort of like, the dragon's breath ice cream type of stuff. I think there's certainly room for that, for sure.
I mean, you could do, like, if everybody was so sad last summer when the Choco Tacos were gone, you could do like a fruity kind of take on that, where it's like the taco shape. Like, it's a great idea, and it's really tasty.
Okay, well, good thing this one doesn't kill you. How about this?
This was interesting. So Uber came out with their 2022 data on what was lost the most in their vehicles. And one, it's very surprising the number of things that people lose. Pets were lost all the time. They had to call in and say, I forgot my dog in the Uber. A few hamsters were left in the Uber. But it was interesting the number of things that kind of foretell other trends happening in the world. So eggs was a big one, people calling into Uber and saying, I left my eggs behind. And whereas before, eggs were only $1, so who cares? When eggs are like $5-6 a dozen, maybe you care a little bit more. So they said they saw this spike in the number of reports that people had left eggs in Ubers. I was surprised the most forgetful day of the entire year is April 5th. Which is just to me like a random, like I tried to figure out why it would be that day. Like you'd think it would be New Year's Eve or something, but that's the day that people tend to forget the most items in Ubers.
Wait, so does this image have anything to do with the list, or is this just like a random image that happened to have some eggs on it that we use?
No, so they call out some of the particularly odd things that people left in Ubers. So they kind of made this image from oh yeah, I mean, unicycle is not even that weird, like compared to some of the stuff. I mean, like, sorry, like pets,
the antlers?
Like there's all kinds of like very particular things like that. And then they had the most forgetful cities. So the top 5 most forgetful cities are Jacksonville, Florida, San Antonio, Texas, Palm Springs, Houston, and Salt Lake City were the top 5. So if you live in one of those cities, make sure that you're remembering.
So can someone in chat theorize as to what those cities have in common that would make them the most forgetful?
Yeah.
So so you said Jacksonville,
San Antonio, Palm Springs, Houston, and Salt Lake City. And actually Miami, I think Miami was 6.
I have no idea what connects those together at all.
I mean, like tourism and like vacation destinations. I'm not sure about Jacksonville, but yeah, like Palm Springs, Miami, Houston. Makes sense.
And I want to know why April, and it's not just April 5th was the most forgetful day. April is the most forgetful month overall. Like what's happening in April that nobody remembers their stuff in an Uber? And this is another one where, a company kind of crunched the data on what happened in the previous year, but this was Flytrex, so the company that delivers food by drones. So they crunched the number on their deliveries from 2022, and these were the top items that were delivered, actually cuisines here that were delivered in 2022. So number 1, sandwiches and salads, number 2, chicken and wings, 3, Mexican food. So probably not big surprises, but the number 1 most delivered item overall by drone last year from restaurants were fries. That was the top option delivered.
So are those Flytrek drones? Are they big enough to actually carry a full-size pizza?
Pizza. I think pizza was 4. Number 4 on the list.
Yeah, it's on the list here. I didn't realize there was. That
big.
Do you know much about how available the service is now?
So this is actually only data from Texas and North Carolina, I believe. I mean, they're only in a few states, so it is pretty limited. But it does take into account it's like over 20,000 orders. So it's a fairly good amount of orders that they're crunching the numbers on.
And they have FAA clearance now, right?
So I think it's 6 companies that have FAA clearance to do it at this point. And they're big companies, so.
Yeah, that's amazing. So is the idea that drone delivery is going to be more for relatively long distance orders that a normal, car-based delivery wouldn't be able to cover, or is it meant for really dense urban populations to get, 6 blocks as fast as possible?
Yeah, the latter. In this case, it's the latter. So the average time from order or from takeoff to delivery is 3 minutes and 30 seconds. So it's a very short delivery span. And I think they said that their shortest delivery overall, so literally from when you put in the order to when the drone delivers it at your house, it was something like 12 minutes. So it's a pretty close proximity.
That's amazing.
Yeah,
that's incredible.
Yeah, and the next screen here, just really quick, this is on the grocery side of it, so you can see what people are ordering there. The number 1 most ordered item was bananas overall, which not surprising at a number of grocery stores. That's also the number 1 most purchased thing.
So does this list, do we think it sort of directionally matches what's bought in grocery stores, that produce is that big of a chunk? Or is that sort of like oh, I forgot, I ran out of tomatoes and I need them for my recipe. So
I think that's a lot of what's happening here, because just under the bananas, it was milk, eggs, things like that. I thought eggs was kind of surprising. You'd think people might be kind of nervous to get eggs delivered by drone, but that was the 4th most ordered item. Actually, 3rd was chocolate.
Yeah, so this must be more like emergency buys, right? You're not doing your primary shopping this way. It's oh, I forgot this, or I just ran out of this.
Yeah,
which the produce stuff would certainly make sense.
And your cart can't be that, it's a drone and it can't deliver, 30 bags. So it's got to be a pretty small order that you're putting through.
Yeah, and just for everyone to hear, what's the name of the company again that does this, so they could look at it?
This is Flytrex, which Flytrex, I believe, is the number 1 company delivering food right now, I believe.
Yeah, amazing. What the heck?
Oh, this is interesting. So this is a company called Zafalto, and so it's a European company, and they're planning to launch these dinners in space by 2025. So it's about $150,000. So it's not, super available to the average person, but it's 6 hours. It takes you up into the stratosphere. So you're actually not going into space itself. You're going into the stratosphere. And part of that is because there's still gravity in the stratosphere, but you still get that, the look of black space. You still see the curvature of the Earth, but it is a dinner. So you have some initial appetizers on the ground, takes you up into space. You have a really nice dinner in space. There's a wine tasting menu. There's some other events. And this is pretty far along. So they have, a number of investors in this, and they're pretty big. I think Airbus is one of their big investors. So this isn't kind of pie in the sky thinking. This is probably coming at some point here. But I think it just shows, we've covered a number of these types of options, how close space tourism is probably coming, in the near future.
So, but this is not you're not getting high enough that you get any weightlessness.
No, that would add it's a whole nother wrinkle. So
I think about that. You could for about the same price, you could fly and go weightless for 3 minutes. Is it better to do that and get 3 minutes of weightlessness, or have 3 hours of eating a fancy meal?
Yeah.
Stratosphere?
I guess it depends on,
I feel like the
your
waitlist thing is
personal
better, isn't
preferences.
it? Like, to actually get
Like
that
I would
experience?
think. I mean, I would think. Yeah, I mean that's like such a novel experience. Absolutely.
It's pretty cool though. It's amazing that they can do
Yeah.
this.
Yeah.
I'm just anticipating having to write a top 500 space restaurants report in
Yes.
about
Yeah.
like 10 to 20 years.
Really.
It's coming. Hopefully this is all coming.
You
Oh,
actually just talked about this,
I talked
Jack.
about
So
this.
we
Yeah.
could, yeah.
So Mike, you know
Um,
the whole, you know the whole story. Anything, any
Yeah.
wrinkles you want to add to this?
The only other one, so in that same study that they did, they actually figured out if AI could order chemicals online. In this case, it was to make a medication, and if those chemicals weren't available online, could it figure out substitutes that were readily available to make that medication? And it did. So it actually figured out substitutes, it ordered them online. And the scary part is, in this case, they were ordering it for something innocuous, but could it order, those options for something that isn't as innocuous in the future?
Yeah, I think the paper said that the AI was not yet good or capable of replicating itself, which is good. And it wasn't yet capable of preventing humans from turning it off, which is probably a good thing. Well, but it was able to manipulate a real world human being into doing its bidding. And I think like you think about this more broadly, which is, with billions of people on Earth, I don't know, there's a lot of people you get potentially manipulate. Like, hey, you get this like a phishing message, like, I'll put $1 million in your bank account if you just do X, Y, and Z.
We're very money motivated, absolutely.
It's pretty, I don't know, where do you sit on the debate, Mike? Do you think that AI will lead to the extermination of humanity, or is that far-fetched?
I'm cautiously optimistic. I worry about kind of the arms race to be first and really speeding headfirst into it. And but I, like in the long term, I guess, I wouldn't want to live past, the years that I have left, I guess. So, I think it's going to get scary.
Yeah, I'm pretty much where Mike is, honestly. I feel like there are many factors that could go wrong, and I feel like, I don't know, it just feels like in science fiction we predicted a lot of this stuff already just by thought, and I feel like so many of these narratives that people are seeing in movies and books are slowly just sort of coming true in some way. And so I'm optimistic that because we've seen these narratives already, there is some incentive to try and curtail that from happening, but who knows?
Yeah, I think the big issue is what they call the alignment problem in AI, which is, if I were to like express a thought to you, Mike, or you would still understand the general context of, us and the world. But if you tell an AI, and the classic example given is like, hey, let's write an AI to minimize the spread of cancer. Well, it might say, well, the best way of doing that is make sure there's no people, then no cancer could spread, right? And you get to all these really bad things where, they say it's sort of like the tale of King Midas, right? It's like, I want everything I touch to turn into gold. Well, eventually you touch your food, can't eat that anymore. Touch your daughter, that turns into gold too. Like all these unforeseen consequences from not being able to state what you really want in a way that the other entity can understand. I don't really see a way past that, at least with where we are today, but we'll see. Next few years should be interesting.
And then really quickly, I'm sure we're well past time here. Yeah, so this is Royal Caribbean is testing this right now. They are going to launch it on a future cruise ship, but they're kind of testing ideas. But we've seen a lot of these kind of mixed reality or augmented reality dinners across the country. There have been a few in Florida. There was that Aero Banquets in Florida. There was one called Atmos in Florida. Disney does a number of these things. But so Royal Caribbean heard from their customers that they wanted more immersive dining experiences. So they're testing this right now, which is basically a dining room that kind of mimics a train car. So those are screens on either side of the dining room there. And the idea is that it would take you possibly to like 6 locations all around the world, or even fantasy locations. So you could, take a trip on the Polar Express and your meal would match where you're going. So, if you're going to the Old West, maybe you're having an Old West dinner. And then actually there would be elements throughout the meal that would even augment the experience even further. So their example was, if you're in the Old West, maybe, a robber runs through the dining car and, with a gun or something. So I think we're going to see a lot more of this just kind of as screens get better and more realistic, and consumers see more of this kind of in their recreation experiences.
That sounds like a lot of fun. It sounds like a one-time thing you would do, but it sounds like a lot of fun.
It sounds a little random to me, like why you're on a boat and you would go like on a train, but I don't know.
If you're on a
And then
cruise
this
for over a week, you need something to do
yeah.
at some point.
Yeah, true. Gotta get yeah. And then this is just funny. This is out of Japan. So this is a cafe that opened in Tokyo called Tomodachi ga Yataru. So I apologize if I'm butchering it, but that translates to the cafe run by your friends. And it's basically, you know, a lot of cafes and kind of, you know, restaurants in Japan, they use honorifics. It's a very formal experience. This is the exact opposite. When you walk in the door, they greet you like you're an old friend. They say, you know, long time no see, or we were expecting you, or something like that. And then the menu, actually, the items on the menu are named things like, I'll get what I always drink. And so it's actually a drink on the menu, but you'll say like, I'll get what I always drink. Or there's a different one that's the one flower cocktail that I had the other day. So you specifically say, I'll have the one flower cocktail that I had the other day. So the whole thing is designed to mimic like, you know, you're going out to eat with your friends, and it's kind of, you know, your old haunt that you always go to. So
Is this
kind of
because
just
there's a
funny
shortage of people with
concept.
friends?
I mean,
this is-
if you read a lot about Japanese culture, that's, I think, definitely a part of it. Yeah.
There's that, and there's like the underpopulation all of a sudden, and not enough people having kids in the whole thing.
Yeah. But it's a beautiful restaurant too. It looks really nice.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Mike. And we should get on to sort of the main course, if you will. We have a great report that we and the team puts together called our Table Stakes Tracker. And I just wanted to share just one slide from this. This comes out, periodically to show you what's happening with the industry and what's on operators' minds and how restaurant openings and closings are going. There's 3 charts here. Just know for each one of these, the red line represents for each month how many permanent restaurant closures there were that month, and the green line represents how many brand new restaurant openings there were. And we have overall at the top, and we have chains only at the lower left, and we have independents only at the lower right. And you can sort of see when we got into the COVID period, obviously the red line gets really high and the green line gets sort of low. But we're at a point now where like the green and red line are just starting to like overlap each other, if you will. So I think we've hit like some point of stasis basically at this point, where we're not seeing, you know, unit expansion for the industry, neither are we really seeing unit contraction anymore. We seem to have hit some sort of a relatively stable level following 3 years of basically just craziness in the wake of COVID. And with that as a segue, we wanted to dive in a little bit deeper, specifically into the world of chains. And we is going to take us through highlights from our brand new, actually, it's not even brand new yet, our upcoming, almost brand new in just a few days, 2000 latest edition top 500 chain report. So what do we got?
So this is the 5th year now that we've done the top 500 report. We've used to call it the Firefly 500 report, but top 500 just sort of feels more, like sort of, current and, in keeping with industry standards, and it communicates it in a more direct way. If we could go to the next slide, Jack, it will show you sort of where a lot of methodology comes from in sourcing both unit count information and sales performance information. We use several of our in-house analytics platform, Firefly, Scores, and Brand Fingerprints to determine unit counts, limited time releases, and consumer perspectives on the top chains in the United States. And to fill out our data set with sales performance, annual unit expansion, and average unit volume, AUV, we released a survey several months ago asking for direct input from chains. We had roughly, between 80 to 100 chains that actually supplied us with their, annual 2022 performance data. And for chains that we did not have data for directly, we use any combination of, public disclosures, FDDs, SEC filings, and also sort of industry growth numbers to get our estimates as close and as accurate as possible. So that's where our data is coming from. And we continue to improve upon this methodology year after year. This report was also done in partnership with Nation's Restaurant News. So you'll be looking forward to their top 500 report coming out soon, sorted in a different way than we do, but still containing some of the same information. So with that said, let's go into an overview of the top 500 for the calendar year of 2022. We have 504 chains that qualify within this list, ranging from 2,000 units down to the bottommost cutoff at 40 units. That number keeps going up year after year, but this year the cutoff at the end is 40 units. So we sort our ranking by unit count instead of sales performance. So that's where that information really comes into hand. And this year, in this year's 2022 top 500, overall, we have all of these chains aggregate up to around 235,000 units, which is a 2.1 increase since last year, and especially a larger increase when it comes to system-wide sales, up to $390 billion. So it's a very big year in terms of sales performance for chains. If you remember just a few minutes ago, Jack was talking about how sort of, there's very little unit expansion and very little unit contraction in recent months. And from this data, it seems like that does hold up. Most of the segments that we and chains that we look up here average at around -1% to +2% unit expansion, whereas for sales, those numbers are a lot larger this year. So it seems that the prevailing strategy for success this year seems to be increasing sales to drive up average unit volume instead of literally expanding your unit counts.
And just if I can maybe just help clarify, this report is being published in 2023 and in the upcoming days, but we call it the 2022 report because it covers the entirety of the 2022 calendar year. So we can get actual numbers were available. So we're looking at everything that happened basically through December of this most recent year.
Yeah, between January to December 2022. Yeah, there are a lot of factors that must have driven up, these sales figure, and Ajah's assessments in chat of sort of menu price inflation and driving up menu prices is a pretty key factor in sort of the sales increase that we're seeing system-wide. If you can go to the next slide real quick. Out of the 504 chains that we have within our database that qualify within our unit range, we sort them into 16 reporting segments based on their service type and also by their cuisine type. So we have segments like LSR coffee, LSR salad helpful, chicken, Mexican. We end up having 6 full service segments and 10 limited service segments based on service type and cuisine type. And as you can see in the chart here, every single segment within our report this year was able to grow their sales pretty significantly, and 10 out of 16 segments actually managed to bring their sales growth up into double-digit territory, which is a pretty key thing, especially when you compare it to sort of unit expansion, which is in the next slide.
So can we talk about this for a second?
Yeah, go ahead.
So this is not inflation adjusted.
No,
right.
So
if you sort of back out inflation and put it into sort of like real dollars from the year prior, basically, if you had a growth rate of above like 7.5%, 8%, you probably grew in real terms. But if that segment had a growth rate of less than that, then you probably didn't quite keep pace with inflation. Is that accurate to say?
Yeah, so we ran this exercise a couple weeks ago using a sort of an average inflation rate of around 7.5 to 7.7%. And without that inflation adjustment, around 90% of chains within this year's top 500 were able to have a positive sales growth this year. If we adjust all of these chains by that 7.7 inflation rate, that 90% falls down to around 67 to 70%. So still, 2/3 of the top 500 were still able to, grow their sales in tangible ways, even factoring into inflation. But that 20% drop is pretty significant if you really think about it.
And if we were to look back a little bit further, I don't know if we have this elsewhere, but if we look at some of these segments, are there any ones where we've seen sort of sustained growth, throughout the COVID period and now in this most recent year? Or is a lot of the stuff we're seeing here sort of rebounds from having been depressed during COVID?
Not to dodge your question, Jack, but that is actually coming up in a couple later slides. So I'm going to address that a little bit later.
Okay, so let's keep going. Units.
Yeah. So so in contrast to sales, you have unit growth, and as you can see, most segments within the top 500 were pretty conservative when it comes to unit expansion. That was the same story that we witnessed in the calendar year of 2021. The 2 of the 3 standouts that we have here are LSR Salad Helpful, which comprises a variety of healthy chains like Sweet Green, Tropical Smoothie Cafe, Smoothie King. All of those have been consistently growing in the past couple of years, mostly because a lot of these chains are younger. There's a lot more movement, especially within the sort of the lower 250 of our ranking, but also because consumer demand for healthful cuisine has been on a consistent high. So we're seeing those numbers reflected here. And LSR chicken and an LSR sandwich are, very familiar territory. And so those segments we've seen perform relatively well over the years. So these numbers aren't surprising. The only segment that we're seeing sort of like declining unit counts this year is FSR mid-scale, which are, chains like IHOP, Denny's, Waffle House, and there's a lot of volatility in that segment as sort of the winners and losers sort of balance each other out. Yeah, but even mid-scale has been able to sort of positively grow their sales figures. So, that unit decline may not be super, may just be a sort of like temporary thing. But yeah, just to sort of supplement the story, we went into our Firefly operator database and pulled out around 6,000 chain units with a founded date in 2022 to see, who's creating new units this year. And it seems like the story here is that unit expansion is not really an industry-wide or a segment-wide strategies. It's more concentrated in specific top chains. So these 10 chains that you see before us, all of their new 2022 founded units combined account for around 37% of new units that we found in our Firefly database this year. So it feels more like a concentrated story than an industry-wide unit expansion movement.
It's amazing to see Crumble just continue to grow like that.
Yep, we're gonna get to them in a bit. Yeah, and so this slide, there's a lot of number here, so there's a lot of names here, but every year we keep getting asked who are the top 10 units, top 10 chains ranked by unit counts, who are the top 10 chains ranked by sales count, and also who are the top 10 unit and sales grower within our top 500. And these are the sort of, I would say, winners or leaders of the industry this year. Overall, when you look at the very top of the list, so the first and the third tables reading from the left, a lot of these rankings did not change. These chains have been leading the pack in terms of unit count and sales performance for the past couple of years. So when you're getting to that scale, sort of dethroning the top 10 to top 20 is a pretty rare occurrence. In contrast, when you get to the sort of like, high performing growers, you're usually seeing lower unit counts and lower sales performance, but pretty, significant growth stories. So these are the chains that really performed well last year in terms of sort of where they ended up at the end of the year and also how they changed compared to the prior year. And so with that, I wanted to sort of break this down and talk about some high performing segments that we discovered in our analysis this year, starting with two segments that we believe were really interesting this year, LSR coffee and LSR dessert. These segments sort of go hand in hand because even though they offer slightly different, products and offerings, I would say these two are the best in this universe of capturing sort of the sweet tooth of the industry. Last year, one of our findings in the 2021 Firefly 500 is that consumers really developed a sweet tooth over the pandemic. And this year, that momentum is still very much here to stay. Overall, LSR dessert snack, that whole segment, so the Baskin Robbins, the Jenny's ice cream, the Salt and Straw, all of those dessert chains, and specifically the crumble cookies of this universe grew sales by around 12%, and similar to also LSR coffee. And these two segments sort of contain our most, I would say, exponential growers. So the picture you see on the screen is a chain called Mochi Nut, which is both the chain with the highest 1-year unit growth and also 1-year sales growth in 2022. Mochi Nut specifically, let me just find my table here, grew their unit count. Jamie in the chat asked what LSR means. LSR just means limited service restaurants, so quick service, fast casual. But back to Mochi Nut. In 2022, between 2022 and 2021, Mochi Nut, which is sort of a mochi donut chain, grew their sales count, grew their unit count by 156%, but their sales count by 243%. So that's a pretty significant jump. They're our top grower of the year. And we kept thinking about why this chain was doing so well. And it feels like there are a lot of factors that are going well for them. As a dessert chain, they have a very scalable model, easy to create if you have the batter and the recipes down, very easy to switch up flavors, incorporate more trend-forward ingredients. And like Holly said, they're damn delicious. I believe, Jack and Mike, if you correct me if I'm wrong, I believe we actually had these donuts at a company event last summer, so we can test.
We did. It's an awesome concept, and they do Korean corn dogs there as well. And when I visited in the past, there's always been like a line to get in. I don't know if there's still a line these days, but I think that business is built to scale because, you know, you order on, I think you order like on an app, you know, or the kiosk in store. They make it really easy, and the labor requirements are fairly minimal for what it is. So that's why they're growing so fast, but it's a great concept. It's delicious.
Yeah, and it feels like it combines a lot of our sort of trends that we've noticed industry-wide, you know. They're very trend forward. They also are gluten-free and low calorie because they're made of a rice batter instead of traditional donuts. So this company has a lot of things going for them.
Yeah, there's some LTO insights in there too, because each time you go in, there's like a new flavor to discover, right? Yep. That's part of the experience, is going to like, hey, what do they have today?
Right. And speaking of new rotating flavors, if you can go to the next slide, we have crumble cookies, which is sort of like a sort of an industry darling that a lot of publications like the New York Times and stuff, or the Atlantic, have covered in the last couple of months alone. They were one of the top growers within our sample last year, and they continue to sustain that growth. They nearly doubled their unit counts up to around 700 units this year, breaking into, I believe, the top 50. And similarly, they also grew their sales by around 150%. So really, their success is very interesting to observe because it's a very controversial chain. A lot of people love them, and a lot of people do not understand why they're as popular as they are. But, you know, speaking to what we've observed, like you mentioned, Jack, it's very customizable.
I think Wee's internet bill wasn't paid in full, so I'll just jump in real quick. Probably most of you have been to a crumble already. They do an amazing job. I mean, everything from the packaging, which almost looks like a gift box when you pick it up, to the ease of ordering at the kiosk, to the general simplicity of the experience. It's all great. So we'll hope that Wee comes back, but I'll probably just sort of wing it until he does, and hopefully I can predict what he was going to say. Another one of the growth segments that we've seen and continue to see is sort of like this salad / healthy, you know, typically fast casual style concepts. This is one of those interesting ones that I believe was growing pre-pandemic and has continued growing post-pandemic, which makes it fairly unique. You know, a lot of the other segments where we're seeing recent growth in the most recent year, some of that is a consequence of, you know, sales having taken a hit in the immediate aftermath of COVID, and now things sort of rebounding back to where they were, or maybe just a little bit ahead of where they were. This is something that just continues to grow. And if we look even more specifically beyond just the world of chains, we look at all types of restaurants in the US. Those restaurants that focus on maybe a specialty diet, you know, whether it's a vegetarian or a vegan restaurant or something, show exactly the same trend, that they were growing pre-pandemic and growing even aggressively post-pandemic too. Wee, do we have you back?
Yes, I hope you can hear me now.
God,
I'm so sorry,
because I didn't know what to say next. So
I mean, you covered the segment pretty well. They've grown consistently over the last couple of years, and you know, always in high consumer demand. There's not much else we can say about them. That segment is still fast growing, but we believe it might be a point where it's growing.
Can you just give us maybe a list of chains that are in this segment? So, you know.
Yeah, it's a composite of chains that have foods that would typically be described as sort of helpful. So we have salad chains and bowl chains like Sweet Green. We have folks like Smoothie King, Tropical Smoothie Cafe. So anything that sort of primarily brands itself as a health.
Are there any that like names that may
containing-
not be quite as familiar to folks that we want to get on their radar that are in this segment?
Yeah, so there's a chain that sort of the top growing chain of this segment is a chain called Salad and Go. They very similar to Crumble Cookies and Mochi Nut have also over doubled their unit and sales growth. I believe someone in chat actually said that they eat from Salad and Go every single week. Kristen, yeah. So same as Marty also said that Salad and Go has exploded with growth. So they are one of the huge growth chains of this year.
Salad and Go, you said.
Yep, that's their name.
Okay.
Yep, Salad and Go, 82 units this year.
Let's go from salad to
Let's keep moving
steak.
forward. Yep. Yes, seafood steak is one of the highest performing full service segment this year, similar to last year. And internally, we've had a lot of discussions, about how in this economy with rising prices and constraining consumer budgets, whether or not people are continuing to splurge on fine dining, upscale dining, and the high performance of these chains like Texas Roadhouse, Longhorn Steakhouse, all of those chains proves that even in this period of sort of economic uncertainty and sort of recessionary signals, consumers are still willing to splurge for a more refined dining experience, get a steak at a really fancy restaurant. So those occasions are still being
And is this
taken.
recovery mostly? We like, hey, some of the segment was depressed following COVID. Now we're catching back up, or is this sort of real continued organic long-term growth?
It's continued. As we'll see later, FSR seafood steak is one of the very few segments that did not decline in unit counts over the course of the pandemic. So it's been a positive growth for the last 4 years.
Cool.
The last segment I'm going to call out is FSR regional ethnic, which is sort of where we combine a lot of chains that offer sort of mixed ethnicity or globally inspired cuisines. You have places like P.F. Chang's on the cover here, Fogo de Chao, which is a Brazilian steakhouse. But overall, we've seen a really great influx of sort of globally inspired or like culturally specific chains that are performing really well, both across full service and limited service. So it seems that especially in the chain universe, consumers are demanding sort of very interesting, globally inspired dining experiences. And their success is testament to that.
100%. The boomerang. What is the boomerang?
Yeah. So we mentioned this earlier, and I told you I'd come back to this, and I hope we have enough time to cover it. But it's sort of what there's an effect that we're calling the pandemic boomerang. So if you look at this chart, these are sort of total unit counts for the total top 500 chains over the past 3 years between 2019 up to 2022, the past 4 years, sorry. And what we're seeing is a sort of like parabola or like a sort of boomerang effect, where 2019 was a sort of pre-COVID benchmark, units decline in 2020, and then over the last 2 years, we've seen these numbers sort of go back to pre-pandemic modes and sometimes even exceed it. So yeah, smiley trend, parabola, boomerang trend, a lot of creative names to refer to it. And so what we wanted to see is how well each of these individual segments were able to sort of adhere to this total trend. And so we broke it up into 4 different categories. You have the sort of linear growers. And so, like I mentioned earlier, FSR seafood steak, LSR chicken, and LSR salad healthful are the 3 segments in terms of units that were able to consistently grow their units and resisted the declining impact of the pandemic in 2020. So it's just positive the last 4 years.
So these are long-term consistent winners through the pandemic and beyond, these segments. That's great.
Yeah. Next, we have what I would call sort of boomerang surpassers, right? Where they very much follow the trajectory of the overall top 500 universe. These are chains that declined in 2020, but have managed to discover a formula that brings them back up throughout the last 2 years. And for most of these cases, even exceeded their benchmark in 2019. Next up, we have what I would sort of consider the slow winners, where they took, between 2019 and 2021, we're still feeling the impacts of COVID, but have managed to, within the last year, come back to parity and start experiencing sort of positive unit growth.
So some of these look like they're not quite, like FSR American looks like it's still not on the upswing just
no,
yet.
it's not on the upspring, but it's not declining. We actually have
stopped the decline. I see.
Yeah, and so that's a very interesting place for us to transition, because the last segment that we have not accounted for in our 16 segments is FSR mid-scale, which unfortunately has been declining in terms of unit count for over the last 4 years. This is sort of a segment to watch. It's very interesting comparing the results of mid-scale restaurants like IHOP, Denny's, Waffle House with the more high-end full-service restaurants like Texas Roadhouse and Longhorn Steakhouse, because it sort of might be showing what consumers are prioritizing in this environment of sort of economic uncertainty, especially when it comes to full-service restaurants, which traditionally feature higher ticket check averages, a more involved experiences, higher costs, right? And so instead of sort of cutting back on the moments where we splurge on a fancy steak or lobster, maybe consumers are cutting back on times where you go out for breakfast in the morning.
This is, I mean, mid-scale is a segment that's been challenged for a very long time now, going back way before the pandemic. I mean, for the past couple of decades, you'd hear about how mid-scale was a challenge segment. And I think, when we think about that thing that we call the menu adoption cycle, where, what point do different parts of the industry pick up on newer trends, mid-scale tends to be pretty far back in that chart, right? It's one of the last segments to pick up on them. And I guess what we've sort of seen is those brands and even independent operators in the segment that jump on innovation a little bit sooner have been able to reverse that trend, or in some cases completely surpass it in a positive way. Yeah. But those that sort of don't embrace innovation, it's sort of like a slow decline. And it seems like the pandemic has maybe accelerated that decline in some cases as well.
Yeah.
But if you're a mid-scale concept, you're not doomed by any chance. You probably just need to think about having a more contemporary, relevant menu, basically.
Yeah, I think it's just difficult for mid-scale, because I think out of all full service segments, mid-scales by nature of their cuisine type faces the most competition from at-home occasions, right? It's just, you have to differentiate yourself so much more to make that trip to get breakfast out even more appealing than it was before.
I think you have to be willing to differentiate yourself,
yeah.
right? And not get too caught up in the comfort of comfort food, you gotta try new things.
The last thing I'll say before we move on to sort of the more strategic stuff is that information I've presented has only been centered around unit counts, and we don't have time in this segment to sort of look into sales. But the story for sales is very similar to what I mentioned at the beginning of this segment, very different from units, because every single chain with every single segment within our universe has been able to follow the recovery trajectory, the smiley, the boomerang effect when it comes to sales. It's just with unit count and unit expansion, some segments struggle a little more than others to get back to the 2019 benchmark. Yeah.
And I think we can probably, there's this all comes from an upcoming report that goes into excruciating detail about what's happening in the chain universe. It'll be available inside of Report Pro. So if you have Report Pro, go check it out in a few days, and you'll find the report there. And instead of sort of running over by far, which we're always at risk of doing, I think we can maybe sort of cut things off over here. And if you have any questions based on anything you've seen so far, put them in chat. We'll try to answer them for a couple of minutes following the call. And otherwise, I would just invite us all to remember that on June 1st, which is actually not even all that far away, we have our very next edition of the Simply Smarter Show. Mike, will you be able to join us for that one? I'm putting you on the spot.
No, yeah, I'll be here.
Yeah, Mike will bring an army of interesting new things to check out. We'll have a fantastic topic for you. So June 1st, noon Central, Thursday, as always. Remember, it's always the first Thursday of every month. Thank you all for tuning in today. And if you have questions or you don't have a relationship with us at Data Central yet, just email us at hello@datacentral.com. And Mike, if I can keep you on for a couple of moments as everyone starts signing off. Thanks, everybody. So I know we had a little more material to cover, but maybe we could spend a little time on the next edition to just go over some of the stuff we didn't quite make it to. For those that are still listening in, was there like a top 2 or 3 things that you wanted to get to that we didn't get a chance to quite make it to today?
I think, I mean, we always at the end of these, top 500 webinars shadowed a couple of chains to watch for next year's chains that like didn't quite make the 40-unit cut. And those are a couple of chains that I personally love very much. One of which was La Colombe, which I'm literally holding a can of their, nitro brewed coffee in my hands right now. But all of this will be in the report, and the less we tease here, the more they have to discover when they actually read it. So
yeah, that's a spectacular looking store. Mike, was there anything that didn't quite make the list of new things that we checked out at the trends section earlier on that you thought were interesting? Or
Oh, good question. No, I mean, there's all kinds of new products hitting the shelves for the summer, which I think is always interesting. And the stadiums, when MLB season starts up, they always do really weird stuff. So I would say, just keep on top of the news. You're going to see some kooky stuff kind of releasing in the next few weeks, I'm sure.
so can I ask you a modified version of that question? Like you've probably shown us hundreds, if not thousands of trends at this point. As it relates to like this, webinar series, do you ever come across stuff where like, oh, that's pretty interesting, but I just don't think it's appropriate to share it with an audience?
Oh yeah, definitely.
So given that we're no longer officially in the official hour anymore, do you want to share any of that stuff now to the folks that are still listening in? Can you give an example?
I don't know. There was something related to the very first topic that we covered on the webinar today that we definitely cannot get into. So I'll just leave it at that.
The fruit thing? The fruit roll-up thing?
The fruit roll-up thing.
Everyone's curious now. I'm curious now. So
yeah.
Don't afterwards.
Don't Google it on your work computer.
That's a good place to sign off, right? While you're all still curious and about to Google away. So thanks, everybody. We'll see you June 1st. Bye.
Thanks everyone.
Bye.